So for those of you that don't know me, that I'm meeting for the first time today, my name is Andy Agathangelo. I'm the founder of the Transparency Task Force. We are an international community that is dedicated to driving up the levels of transparency in financial services right around the world. Until the beginning of last year, we were focused just on the UK marketplace. But last year, I ran events personally in Dublin, Amsterdam, Zurich, Brussels, Hong Kong, Singapore, Sydney, Melbourne, Washington, DC, Boston, and New York. And the end result is we have a truly international organization. And that's important because if you're looking to try to influence the way the financial services sector works, it really does make complete sense to attack the challenge from an international perspective, because of course every single country is part of the international world. So trying to deal with things on a country by country basis really does not make any sense at all. So I'm going to briefly share my screen on a number of items. The first of which is simply this. This is our TTF International page. And we have activity and events and programs of activity going on in lots of countries and lots of places around the world. As you can see, Hong Kong, the Netherlands, USA, Singapore, Belgium, Luxembourg, Australia, Switzerland, India, Ireland, Canada, France, and of course South Africa too. Now, South Africa is an interesting one from our point of view because TTF South Africa has happened even though I've never actually been there. We did not run an event in South Africa last year at all, but we are still managing to get a nucleus of people who are participating and engaging with us. And one of the greatest things that happened as a consequence of last year's work is that we have published our book, and it's a proper book. Here it is in hardback. It's a hardback version. We also have it on paperback. We also have it in ebook format as well. We will of course circulate a link to get to the book, but the bit I really want to show you is towards the bottom of this web page, because this shows you the people who've been involved from right around the world. I think it's 62, 63 people from right around the world who've been involved with this major initiative, all about the question, why we must rebuild trustworthiness and confidence in financial services and how we can do it. And that's a very important question. We genuinely believe that the financial sector around the world desperately needs reforming. We do not think it is serving society properly, and it needs to change. And whilst, of course, regulators, policymakers, and politicians can most definitely have a positive impact, we think the best kind of change is change from within, change that's all about the sector itself deciding that what it's currently doing isn't good enough and should be changed. So I hope I'm demonstrating to you here that there really is a large number of people involved with our work from right around the world who are into what we are doing. The last of these pages I'm going to show you, this is our ambassadors page. We have ambassadors in many countries around the world, as you can see. With some of them, for example, the UK, USA, Australia, we have many ambassadors. In other countries, such as South Africa, we have just a few. But if I may quickly show you who we do have in South Africa as our ambassadors, we have Andrew Delmont, we have Sharon, who's with us later on today. We also have Gandhi, who unfortunately can't be with us today. And I'm very pleased to say that one of our speakers this evening, Derek, is also becoming a Transparency Task Force ambassador as well. So that's the kind of pleasantries pretty much dealt with and out of the way. Does anybody have any quick questions for me before we move on to the next stage of the event, which is where we'll invite Nicole to share her slides and give her presentation? Anybody have any questions? If you do, please just unmute yourself and fire away. Okay, we're all good. I'll just check in with Jeremy and Andre. Jeremy and Andre, can you both please just unmute yourselves and let's get some introductions out of the way first of all. While they're doing that, we'll go to Gary first. Hi, Gary, please unmute yourself and briefly, I'm emphasizing the briefly, please briefly introduce yourself, Gary. Thank you very much.
Hi, I'm Gary Kleiman. I'm going to be speaking a little bit later. I'm an ambassador from the US, but my real mission is to help Andy and the task force expand into emerging markets. South Africa has sort of been our pilot effort underway for the better part of a year, and we're happy to see it come to fruition. And I'm pleased to meet you, at least virtually. I know the weather there is much better than it is here. We had our first hard frost, so there's sort of snow on the ground still melting. And from my experience with Gandhi, he promised me that we would have a braai on the beach sometime in the near future. So I'm holding out hope for that after these meetings. And I look forward to sharing some remarks with you in about another hour. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Gary. Let's go straight to Andre now. Andre, please, if you can get yourself onto video, that would be good. But either way, please introduce yourself. Thank you.
Okay, I think you got me on video now.
Yeah, great.
Yeah, I'm just a normal insurance broker, nothing fancy. Deal with clients, deal with their pros and cons, and basically realizing that clients, unfortunately, are super emotional. I'm also emotional, but I'm a little bit less emotional than my client. And that to me is one of the biggest problems. Clients are throw the toys out the cot way too soon and forget the long game.
Okay, understand. Short-termism for various reasons is one of the topics we focus on quite a bit. Andre, really nice to have you with us. I hope you enjoy this session, and please do stay on audio. That would be good. Jeremy, could you please unmute yourself and introduce yourself as well, please? And thank you, Jeremy.
Hi, okay. Hi, I'm Jeremy Horson. I head up a company called GCI Employee Benefits. I've been in the industry for 31 years, and we try to bring employee benefits down to member level. Instead of being at company level, we want to be at member level. I know Derek Smorenberg is probably going to join tonight very well. We've been associated for a long time. And I'm thoroughly looking forward to tonight's events.
Thank you for being with us, Jeremy. Lovely to have you. If you can, please do switch to audio. Let's now go to Margaret. Please do unmute yourself again, Margaret, and introduce yourself. Thank you.
Thank you, Andy. Hello, everyone. Good evening. I'm calling in from Durban in South Africa. I know Derek's in Cape Town, and I'm not quite sure where Andre was, but greetings from Durban. I've been in South Africa. We emigrated, my husband and I emigrated in 1984, just before Rubicon. So we've come through a lot of challenges. And, you know, I've been in the employee benefits industry for many years, starting off in London with Aon. And ironically, I'm now with Willis Towers Watson in a business development role for the employee benefits business. And you'll probably be aware that there's going to be a combination of Willis Towers Watson and Aon. So guess what, everyone? I'm going to be going all full circle. And I think many of us in the industry do. I worked with Gandhi for a number of years at a firm in Cape Town called Jacques Milan that Derek knows very well. And I've worked with Mercer in helping develop their South African employee benefits offering, and many years with Alexander Forbes. So I'm delighted that Derek invited me to be part of this. So thank you for having me.
You're very welcome, Margaret. You've mentioned numerous companies that I know quite well. In fact, I used to work for Mercer Employee Benefits myself in the UK. I used to head up business development for Mercer in the UK for a while. Lovely to have you with us, Margaret. I'm very pleased. Thank you. Let us now go.
Thanks, Andy.
You're welcome. You're very welcome. Let us now please go to my colleague, Stephanie. Stephanie, please introduce yourself. Thank you.
Hello everyone, my name's Stephanie. I'm currently a Research and Investigations Associate for the Transparency Task Force. I recently just joined in September after graduating at the University of Portsmouth in England, and I studied criminology and criminal justice.
Thank you, Stephanie. We'll now go to Derek, who is also speaking later, but Derek, briefly introduce yourself. There are a few people perhaps on this session that don't know you yet.
Lovely. Okay, fine. This year I celebrated 5.5 decades in the financial services industry, and at the young age of 76, I'm looking forward to retiring at 95.
There we go.
I've done a lot of stuff in South Africa and a little bit internationally in employee benefits and financial services. And I'm today CEO and founder of a small association, which is growing, called South African Independent Financial Advisory Association. And our objective is to change the dynamics of the financial services industry locally and internationally.
Thank you, Derek, very much indeed, and lovely to have you with us. We're now going to invite, I think that would be pronounced Gerrit, but forgive me if I've got it wrong. Gerrit, please do put yourself onto audio and introduce yourself. Thank you.
Hello, everybody. I'm Gerrit Haynes. I am a longtime investment banker, relocated or located to South Africa about 6 years ago. I'm involved in a DFID-led project called 17 Africa currently, which is helping to mobilize private capital coming into Africa in support of the SDGs.
Fantastic. Thank you very much indeed. The SDGs is going to be a topic of interest, certainly for Nicole and for myself, for reasons I'll explain later. If you can keep yourself on video, that would be good, Gerrit, but don't worry if you can't. Let's now go to, I would imagine, Jose or Jose. I'm not quite sure how to pronounce your first name, sir, but either way, please introduce yourself. Thank you. If you can, you'll need to unmute. I think we need to move on, so we will move on. Apart from my colleague Alexandra, everybody's introduced themselves. Alexandra, please do introduce yourself and cover off a couple of the housekeeping points. Thank you.
Hello everyone, I'm Alexandra. I'm head of events for Transparency Task Force. I'm also half South African, if that's of interest to you. I'll just quickly cover off some things just to let you know that we are recording this session. And we will be using some or all of the recordings, probably to share on social media and to upload on our YouTube channel. So if there's anything you don't want us to include when we upload, just send me an email. I'll put my email address in the chat. And also just to let you know to please use the Zoom chat as much as possible to share your contact details and introduce yourself and your Twitter handle, etc.
Thank you very much indeed, Alexandra. Great stuff. Okay, so I'm going to spend a moment now, just before passing over to Nicole. I'm going to speak about the strategy for driving change that the Transparency Task Force has, and I'm going to give you a very good example of it as well. So the Transparency Task Force has a mission. Our mission is to promote ongoing reform of the financial services sector so that it serves society better. Clearly, we believe the financial industry to be very, very important, but we do not think that it is doing its job properly. We do not think it is putting the interest of the client first and foremost. And by the way, we do not think it is putting the interest of the planet first and foremost either. And I'm sure that's a point that Nicole will refer to when she speaks. However, the simple reality is that talking about problems on their own without doing anything about them is actually quite meaningless. So we have an agenda which is all about actually driving change, and our strategy for driving change is very simple, but also very, very effective. It's a strategy that's been developing and getting better and better and stronger over the last 5 years. The strategy is this. It is to bring together the thinking of two groups of people. On one hand, there are people like me and the 2,700 people in my community around the world who have a sense of passion and purpose for the change that we want to see. The other group are those that we characterize as having the power and the position to make change possible. And this is the group that is made up of people such as politicians, policymakers, regulators, leaders of the major trade bodies and associations, leaders of the major commercial entities, think tanks, etc. People with power, position, influence. What we have learned is that if you want to make changes happen, you must first win the hearts and the minds of the people with the power and the position. And to give you an example of this, We have in the UK, we being the Transparency Task Force, we have opened 2 inquiries, 2 government inquiries relating to financial matters. One about the topic of hidden costs and charges in investments, which is a big issue in the UK. It's a big issue in your country. It's a big issue across Europe, North America, Australia, everywhere. The entire investment industry has a habit of not being very transparent when it comes to costs and charges. So a couple of years ago, we led a meeting in the House of Commons. We got an inquiry opened. It led to some significant changes and positive influence. That's a very good example. Another very good example more recently is that we campaigned for the government to make an inquiry on the issue of pension scams. Pension scams in the UK is a huge problem. A huge problem. Perhaps as many as 40,000 people have been tricked into moving their pension funds into what turn out to be bogus, fraudulent investments. It's a huge problem, especially if the person that's been tricked into moving their fund is relatively elderly and does not have the time to rebuild the lost capital. It's heartbreaking. People have felt even suicidal as a consequence of what's happened. So we campaigned to get an inquiry opened. We campaigned that our Work and Pensions Select Committee, part of our government establishment, open this inquiry, and the inquiry is underway. I've given evidence myself. We've written 4 consultation response papers, etc. All of this is influencing the thinking of the people who have the power and the position, and therefore influencing the opportunity to make new and better rules to protect the organizational integrity of the pensions industry. And what I'm going to do now is show you something I'm very, very proud of, because what you're looking at now is a website. It's a website of the APPG. APPG means All Party Parliamentary Group. It's the All Party Parliamentary Group on Pension Scams. We initiated this All Party Parliamentary Group. And an All Party Parliamentary Group is politicians working together to solve a problem, in this case, to solve the problem of pension scams. Here are the members of Parliament, the members of the British Parliament, who we've recruited into this All Party Parliamentary Group. This gentleman here, Bob Blackman, he's the chairman. All of these people are significant in their own right. This gentleman, Stephen Timms, is particularly significant because he's the chair of the Work and Pensions Select Committee that's currently carrying out the inquiry. And there are many, many other significant people here. For example, this gentleman here, Jack Dromey, he's the Shadow Minister for Pensions from the Labour Party, so he's the opposition. So again, a very influential person, and many, many others too. We're very proud of that. It took a lot of effort, a lot of campaigning, a lot of work. And I'm trying to impress upon you, frankly, that the Transparency Task Force does not just talk about issues, we make change happen. And we do that through our strategy for driving change, which is all about connecting the thinking of 2 groups of people, those with a sense of passion and purpose for the change that we want to see, and those who've got the power and the position to make change possible. You'll see that what we have here is our secretariat, the people who run the committee, run the APPG, and these are all Transparency Task Force members, including some very, very senior people. For example, Leslie Carlile, until quite recently, was the president of the Pensions Management Institute. Peter Glancy is also a very senior figure within Lloyds Banking Group on the pensions and investment side. And there are many, many others, all volunteers, all working with me. I chair this group to make good things happen in the pension space. So in summary, just before I pass over to Nicole, please understand that the Transparency Task Force is an effective campaigning organization. We've become international as a consequence of the work that we did last year, and we are becoming increasingly influential in the UK. And we're very, very convinced that if we apply a similar process to what we've done in the UK to other countries too, we should be able to do something worthwhile in South Africa as well. And there's a particular process we're going to be following. I'll explain what that process is. We are going to be using a very simple mind map methodology. I'll show that to you as well. And you can all play a part in this. We're looking for people to volunteer to help. I will just quickly get to my screen to share it. My screen is struggling to share right now. Bear with me, folks. Okay, so share screen. So what you're looking at here is a mind map, a very simple, straightforward mind map. You'll see at the center of it, we've got the phrase South Africa VIPs. VIPs in the sense that very important people as far as influencing the workings of the financial sector. Over here in green, we've got politicians. Of course, the politicians belong to particular political parties, and there will be a number of politicians who have a direct influence on the way the South African financial ecosystem works. As well as the politicians, the next one down in that kind of amber color are the policymakers. So these people are the non-elected government representatives who often do the very important behind the work scenes of developing policy. Media professionals, whether they're on TV, radio, mainstream newspapers or the trade press. We have a fantastic relationship with the media in the UK, and we've been on the front page of the Financial Times, we've been in the major national newspapers, occasionally in the trade press frequently, 4 times on BBC Radio 4, including a special program called The Transparency Detectives. So having the support of the media is mission critical if you want to drive change. Of course, there are online influencers, people who have significant influence through LinkedIn, through Twitter, and through Facebook. And over on the other side, we have the trade bodies, we have professional associations, think tanks, civil society groups, academics, authors, etc., etc., etc. So step number 1 in reforming the way the financial system works in South Africa is to start to build out that mind map so we understand who the key influencers are. And that's going to be an activity that you're all in a good place to help us with because you're local to South Africa. And of course, that will help things move forward very, very nicely. But that's enough from me. I hope that's dealt with the introduction quite effectively. I'm now going to pass over to Nicole, who is going to take herself off mute and when she's ready to share her slides, etc. So I'm just going to, or forgive me, I'm going to ask you to repeat that process again, Nicole, because I need to change to speaker view first, otherwise we'll all be in little sketches. Please do now share your screen again. Thank you, Nicole.
All right, no problem.
Perfect.
Here we go. Can everyone see that all right?
Perfectly well.
Great. Well, fantastic. Thank you so much. Thanks for the background, Andy. And again, thank you for the invitation to be part of this discussion. You know, at the PRI, we're very supportive of this agenda of creating more sustainable financial systems. And so anything we can do to support these kinds of initiatives, we're always happy to do so. And, you know, transparency in and of itself is such an important component because sunlight is the best disinfectant, as we know. What is encouraging at the moment, actually, on this topic is to see that there is a lot of transformation happening within the financial sector in South Africa already. And I'm sure we'll get to that a bit in the discussion session of this conversation. But for now, I'm happy to take you through some of the PRI's thoughts on how we might want to transform the financial sector in South Africa. Just for those who don't know me, my name is Nicole Martins, and I head up Africa and the Middle East for the UN-supported Principles for Responsible Investment. I'll take just a minute to tell you a bit more about who the PRI is, in case you're not familiar with that, and then we can dive into some of the work that we do and how it might apply in the South African context. If my slide will change, there we go. Right, so just to give you an idea that the PRI was born from, is supported by, but is independent of the United Nations. We are an international NPO. We work as a mix between an industry association and a membership body. We have at the moment more than 3,100 signatories globally. Our signatories can be asset owners, so large funds, sovereign wealth funds, family offices, big insurers. They can be investment managers, or they can be service providers in the investment space. And that includes everything from stock exchanges to ESG data providers, consultants, asset consultants and normal consultants as well. At the moment, our signatories represent more than $100 trillion in assets under management. This is significant because that's more than half of global institutional investment, which means that we're officially past the sort of the point of this being viewed as an arcane or a niche or a fad approach to investment. It's mainstream now in every way. To be a signatory of the PRI is a paid, public, and monitored commitment to implementing the principles of responsible investment, and those all revolve around integrating environmental, social, and governance factors into your investment decision-making process and your active ownership decisions post-investment. So just one of the things that I think I'd really like to see, or we'd like to see in the financial sector in South Africa, is just really a culture of responsible investment. And when you talk about something like responsible investment, it can get confusing because there is a lot of alphabet soup going around and people talk about ESG, RI, SRI, CSI, CSR, green investing, ethical investing, impact investing. Where does everything fit? When we talk about responsible investment, what the PRI is referring to there is really just investment that is a conscious strategy of integrating those ESG factors into your investment decision and your active ownership practices. So it has nothing to do with an ethics, morals, or values-based approach to investing. It's about maximizing long-term returns, so creating sustainable returns in perpetuity. And our hypothesis is that the way to do that is to stop thinking of these ESG factors as non-financial. I had a signatory recently who referred to them as pre-financial, and the argument was that we just don't always know how much they cost yet. But eventually, if you don't account for them now, you do pay for them later. And we've seen plenty of examples of that. And what do we see in terms of, why has there been such a prolific uptake in this approach to investing over time, and what's driving that, and how does that relate to South Africa? So there's three main drivers to the take-up of responsible investment approaches globally. The first one is financial materiality. So we have increasing evidence that integrating ESG effectively, material ESG factors effectively, will lead to financial outperformance. So we have increasing evidence of that, anecdotal and evidence-based, from meta studies that have been conducted looking at thousands of examples over decades of investment decisions. And what we find, quite intuitively, I'd argue, is that companies that can identify and then effectively address material ESG factors, they have lower costs of capital, better loan spreads, they have better customer loyalty, all things that you want as an investor in a company in which you invest. And so investors who take this approach of identifying or valuing the identification and the addressing of these factors are the ones that are outperforming at their portfolios as a whole. We've seen that in the negative. So when you look at examples like the BP oil spill of 2010 or the Facebook Cambridge Analytica scandal, VW emissions scandal, we had here at home Steinhoff, Africa Bank, Resilience. You really can take your pick. These are all examples of an ESG factor that was not properly costed and ended up costing quite a bit. So it became a financial factor very quickly. On the upside, what we've seen now during the pandemic is that products and portfolios with an ESG tilt have been significantly less exposed to systemic risk. So it helps you generate upside and avoid downside. So it's absolutely material. What I'd like to see when we talk about transforming the financial sector in South Africa is an increased recognition of this materiality, right? So at the moment, a lot of the discourse revolves around, oh, but what if I don't want to sacrifice financial return? So I don't want to look at these things, they're sort of nice to have, they're extra, but they really aren't. They should be embedded into the way that we make investment decisions because it creates a much more sustainable market for everybody. The second most prominent driver for responsible investment on a global scale is market demand. So what we're seeing is growing demand from beneficiaries and investors themselves, not just, they want increased disclosure, they want transparency around where their money is going. They're asking not just, in the case of pension funds, not just, am I going to retire well, but what kind of world am I retiring into? And what are you doing with my money to create that world? It's that whole argument of, it doesn't help I retire with a big pile of money. All of it goes to buying free, clean air. And in the South African context, the example I've been given is, I don't understand why my pension fund owns shares in Apple when I have no cell phone signal in my hometown. So it's sort of this idea of wanting to understand more about the impact of the investment decisions that are being made. And then the third driver is regulatory pressure. And this we've seen with really astounding momentum. At the moment, there's more than 800 pieces of regulation and policy that are in place around the world that have something to do with ESG integration or responsible investment. More than half of those have come into effect in just the last 5 years. And that momentum is growing. We see it with the development of things like the EU taxonomy and the sustainable finance strategies around the world. We see it from the commitments that are coming out of net zero targets that are being set at national level, which will be reflected in capital market interventions so that you can get there. So any one of these drivers should be enough to spur South African investors on to make these kinds of decisions, but it's not working. We as PRI have seen a real stagnation in the practice of responsible investment in South Africa. South Africa used to be held up as a sort of poster child for specifically financial sector regulation, and it was seen as very progressive when we introduced Regulation 28 for pension funds more than a decade ago now, asking for explicit consideration of ESG factors in investments. And since then, there's been very little. There was very little implementation of that as it stood. Last year, the FSCA released a guidance note on the sustainability of investments, but it's really more of a nudge. It's not really mandating anything. And so there's been a real stall there. And so when we talk about reforming the financial sector of South Africa, what I would like to see is investors who understand this materiality, a market that demands this from their service providers, and regulation that supports that and makes it possible. One of the things that's very interesting, or at least I find it interesting, is when PRI recently did assessment of our global signatory base, and we were looking at what are the top drivers out of these sort of drivers of the take-up of responsible investment approaches. What we found was that across the board in every market around the world, the number one driver is risk mitigation. So that makes sense, right? Investors understand if I don't integrate ESG into my portfolio, I'm introducing unnecessary risk. That's great. The next most prominent driver in every market except South Africa was market demand. So in every market except South Africa, the market is putting this pressure on service providers. In South Africa, the second most prominent driver is policy and regulation. So in one hand, we acknowledge as investors in South Africa that this is very important. It's material. If we don't do it, we go exposing ourselves to risk. And yet we're waiting to be made to do it instead of just doing it, which I thought was interesting. And I'd like to hear your thoughts when we get to the discussion part, perhaps. So when we talk about reforming the financial sector from a PRI vision, we've got sort of three pillars that we look at, and I think they align very nicely to what Andy was talking about with TTF's work. Is that the first thing is about creating responsible investment, and it's really about empowering investors with information, with knowledge, with clarity, with sight of what's going on. This is everything from capacity development to support in terms of handbooks and guidance on the practice of responsible investment. And of course, there's a lot in there about disclosure requirements and collecting the right kind of data and pushing that transparency really hard. The second pillar is about creating sustainable markets. So we understand that all the goodwill in the world means absolutely nothing if the policy and regulatory environment is not conducive to responsible investment. And so to that end, we are doing a lot of engagement with policymakers and regulators to try and make sure that they are set up for the big transition that's currently underway, is inevitable, and is accelerating at a rapid pace. And we're actually to that developing an emerging market policy toolkit that we're hoping to have a conversation with regulators about in South Africa. We also sit on the working groups with the Treasury and the FSCA that are developing the green finance taxonomy for South Africa, that are looking at competency and capacity requirements for boards and directors. When it comes to climate competence, we are looking at we're on the working group as well for sustainable finance tools and platforms, and we sit on the CISA Responsible Investment Standing Committee, and we're working on the CRISA review at the moment. So we're trying to be really involved in that. So when we talk about transforming the sector, I think it's about getting all of those things to finally be implemented and to talk to one another. And then the third pillar from our perspective is really about what we call the prosperity measure, which is really focusing on real world impact. See, there's been a huge trend in this globally, and the discourse in South Africa is definitely impact focused at the moment. On one hand, people are very excited about the idea of a more impactful investment, and on the other, they're terrified that it's going to lead to prescription. But that's a whole nother discussion. But I think what would be great in terms of transforming the financial sector is to ensure that investors understand that beyond identifying which ESG factors directly impact your investments at an individual or portfolio level, it's really important to understand the impact of your portfolio, your investments on the broader socioeconomic functioning, on the stability of the market. Because even if you aren't investing explicitly for impact, understanding that and communicating it to the market, it sends a really important signal and helps us to create sustainable market so that there is something to invest in 10 years from now. You know, there's no returns on a dead planet, we all know that, or in a society that's been ripped apart by out of control inequality or poor governance. So we need to think about that. That's sort of my 2 cents about some of the ideas we would have, and I'm looking forward to the discussion. This is just a page. I'm happy for these slides to be shared with everyone afterwards. If you want to keep up with what we're doing, we have various ways in which you can do that, whatever your preferred learning method is. And I'll just also do the final one, which is just my email. I'll put it in the chat as well. If anybody's got any questions, I'm happy to discuss at a later stage.
Wonderful. That was really wonderful, Nicole. That could not be any clearer or any more passionately delivered than it was. So thank you very much indeed. I've got a few points that I'd like to come back on, but may I first of all take it out to the group? So please just wave your hand or unmute yourself if you'd like to make a point at this stage for Nicole to respond to, if anybody has anything. It looks like not yet. So I'm going to talk about something that I had a conversation with Fiona Reynolds about just a few weeks ago, and it speaks directly, Nicole, to the point you made about BP. So I'm going to share my screen. I hope you like this, Nicole, because this is right up your street. So in the USA, there's a massive database called Violation Tracker, which, as you can see, it says it's all about understanding which corporations are the biggest regulatory violators and lawbreakers throughout the United States. And there is a Transparency Task Force initiative underway with the leaders of Violation Tracker to bring Violation Tracker to the UK. And once we've got it into the UK, to look at doing exactly the same in other countries, including South Africa. And the bit you'll really like is this. What they've managed to do is hoover up data from many different agencies. So if you click here, it's quite small writing, but you might be able to see that you've basically got agriculture, alcohol, Bureau of Industry and Security, all the way through to, for example, Environmental Protection Agency, yeah, and all these other government bodies. So basically what happens is Violation Tracker hoovers up all the data from those federal agencies, and it organizes it and manages it in a very powerful way. For example, it may be of interest to you to see that the worst single offense is toxic securities abuses, which is basically about investment abuses. The second worst is environmental violations. And if you click on environmental violations, you get to the next level of detail down. And you mentioned BP earlier. Yeah, this is the Gulf situation. You also mentioned VW, I think, earlier as well. So this has got the detailed analysis of the major top 10 companies. And then you've got individual penalty records. So this is gold dust for anybody that's into understanding who the violators are. This is absolutely priceless data. And that's why we are so actively supporting it. It's like a transparency machine for violations across different types of activities. And of course, what I'm focusing on right now is violations in relation to environmental issues, but you can slice the data in many other ways. So let me just quickly show you. If we go to here, you can go to all kinds. If you go to industry totals, you'll see the financial services is the worst offender. If we look at financial services in a bit more detail, you'll get the worst offending organization, which is Bank of America at the top. Credit Suisse is number 10, even though they've had over $10 billion worth of fines. And then you have the individual violations. And if you then click on a particular company, let's pick on, for argument's sake, Goldman Sachs here, it will give you the detail about that particular offense. So, you know, very powerful data. That's why we are so actively supporting this initiative. That's why we're working with Violation Tracker to to get it into other countries. UK is the focus right now, but once you've got UK sorted, who knows? South Africa, Canada, etc. Nicole, it would be nice to have a conversation with you about that, because I think your members in South Africa and the Middle East would probably like to see and hear that. Okay, I'll just check in to see if there are any other comments or questions before we move on. I think.
Yeah, I'd just like to make a comment. Nicole, I sit on the ASISA distribution committee, and I sit shoulder to shoulder with all the large insurance companies and asset managers, and I sit there in my lonely little space, and I observe with a great deal of interest these big corporations, and I know that they have an unenviable task of trying to provide returns to their clients and fund members. Jeremy, you'll no doubt, and Margaret will no doubt go along with what I'm going to say now, but I'm quite sure that this information that you've just shared with us, Andy, will be of great interest, and I look forward to sharing this information, certainly with all the financial advisors, just to say this is the real world. Yeah. And I've heard, but I've never seen it set out so brilliantly about some of the big players and the fines that they've been receiving for being not as clean as we would have expected them to be. Thanks, Andy.
Well, thank you, Derek. You make a great point. My colleague Alexandra tomorrow will circulate the notes from the Zoom meeting, including, of course, Nicole's slides, and they were very, very clear indeed. And what I'll ask my colleague Alexandra to do, we may as well do this, is provide a link to this particular page. This is our groups page. I'm going to deal with this very quickly, just so I don't spend too much time on it. We have 20 or so groups within the Transparency Task Force. This quotation is pretty famous. I'm sure you've heard it before. If you haven't, I hope you like it. The quotation is, "Never doubt that a small group of thoughtful, committed citizens can change the world. Indeed, it's the only thing that ever has." I think there's a lifetime's wisdom in that quotation. It's from Margaret Mead. And that spirit, the spirit captured by that quotation, is very much the ethos of the Transparency Task Force. So we started off with just one group, and it was focused on the issue of costs and charges in pensions and investments, but we now have 20 or so. One on governance, culture and conduct, as you can see. All of our groups have free to attend meetings of these kind of meetings. The next, as you can see, is week beginning Monday the 4th of January is our next cycle of group meetings. Financial stability, this one's about protecting the wealth of the elderly. Here's our violation tracker section. So here, there's a video you can watch. It's me and the guys at Violation Tracker in Washington, DC, talking about the project we have on the go. There's a 2-page exec summary you can download. There's an article that's recently been published about the initiative as well. So that's, Alexandra will draw your attention to that when she circulates the notes. But if there are any other groups here that you want to become involved with, then please just tell us. For example, several of you are relevant to the financial planning group for obvious reasons, etc., etc., etc. We recently launched our Females for Fairer Finance group, which has got about 600 people in it, 600 ladies in it. And that's all about the idea summed up very, very well by Christine Lagarde back in 2012. She was reflecting on the global financial crisis, and her quote is quite clever. If it had been Lehman Sisters instead of Lehman Brothers, the financial crash might never have happened. I think that's a really clever quote. I think she was talking about the inherent testosterone charged way that us blokes often go about doing things. I know I'm being very generalist here, I know, but I'm making the point that she made very well. We have a group all about fighting financial crime. It's a big group. So many people are being scammed in so many ways. We're doing what we can there. If pensions are relevant to you, then join the pensions group, please. Pisces is all about the sort of things that Nicole's just been speaking about so eloquently. The P stands for purposefulness, the I for impact investing, the S for sustainability, the C for the C for climate change, the E for ESG, and the last S for socially responsible investing. So we sum all that up into Pisces. It's got about 350 people in it. We've recently embarked on a major project, the International League of Ethical Financial Services Leaders. We are identifying high caliber, ultra professional, ultra ethical financial services leaders. And we're saying to them, tell us how you think, tell us how you work. Tell us how and why you do not see there to be a tension between doing things purposefully and doing things profitably. In fact, go beyond that. Tell us how and why you understand that by doing things in a purposeful and principles-based way, not only will you make profit, you'll make sustainable profit, trustworthy, reliable, good, healthy profit, as opposed to those leaders who might just squeeze the system for short-term gain, short-term hike in share price, and all those sorts of things. That's a really powerful project. We've already done 5 very, very interesting video interviews. Some of our community are pretty unconvinced the regulators are doing as much as they should be. So we have a group focusing on keeping the regulators on their toes. That's called Regulators Watch. Investments, I don't need to explain, FX and payments. The foreign exchange market is probably the most opaque part of the financial ecosystem. It really needs sorting out. The amount of money that pension funds in particular are losing because of opacity in the FX market is staggering, staggering. Banks and building societies, academics, we've got about 250 academics, including people from Harvard, from Stanford, from Cambridge, from Oxford, and other wonderful universities around the world. Retired professionals are for people who've left the industry but want to put something back. A major project on the go at the moment about data standards involving the Bank of England and the Financial Conduct Authority, etc., etc., etc. So Alexandra will circulate a note to that page when she sorts out the notes. And if there are any of those groups that you want to become attached to, then please just let us know. And of course, it's great networking. It really is great networking, not just within your own country, but with people quite literally around the world. So can we now just thank Nicole for her session? We'll go to gallery view. Please do, what we do in Transparency Task Force, we wave like this to show our appreciation. So please do wave your appreciation for Nicole. Thanks very much, Nicole. Very, very good to have you with us today. Thank you. And we're going to go straight to Derek, who I'm very pleased to say has accepted my invitation to become an ambassador of the Transparency Task Force. Derek, there are a few people on the session who may not know you, so please do recap with your introduction, and then over to you to talk about what you think needs to happen to fix financial services in South Africa. Thank you very much indeed, Derek. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Andy, and hi to everybody. I won't repeat what I said early on. I know that Chris Fisher has just joined us. He's one of our members, and he knows all about me, as does Andre, Jeremy, and Jose. Yes, I think the departure point of what the message I want to give in 10 minutes this evening is basically to just paint a picture of the South African problem. And the South African problem is that we have the most unequal society in the world from an income and from many aspects, yet we've got the finest constitution in the world. And an unequal society is unequal from the perspective simply of the following statistic. 93% of all South Africans will not be able to afford to retire. Now that's a scary statistic. We do not have a satisfactory, or even an attempt at a satisfactory old age trusted system. It's just not available. And so the stark reality is that in South Africa, if you're one of the 7% who may be able to afford to retire, you're going to be part of the mass. And the masses are faced with the awkward reality that they don't earn much income. We currently have a 43% unemployment rate. Now, these are really scary statistics, but paints the picture of what is South Africa. So we have this unequal society. We have the major challenge that the majority of the people are unemployed, or some people would say unemployable. So where does SAFA, South African Independent Financial Advisory Association, fit in? Well, there are about 30,000 so-called financial advisors in the whole of South Africa. Well, that number will just tell you another statistic, that the majority of people in South Africa will never have access to any form of financial advice. So then we come to the next reality check, that those who could possibly afford to engage with someone on financial advice, they split into two camps: those who are members of pension and provident funds, or retirement funds, for be an easier description, and those who are not. And then the other statistic is that we have an aging sector of those who do have a little bit of money getting older. And then the final statistic is that people are living longer and longer and longer, especially those who happen to have access to first world medical advice and care. So welcome to South Africa for those of you in the States and in the UK. This is the bigger picture. All the things that Andy and Nicole have set out so well this evening speak for themselves in South Africa as well. We have a regulatory authority, and we have a very good Reserve Bank. We have had interesting times when it comes to ministers of finance. We once had a minister of finance who is in the job for 3 days. He was appointed by the ex-state president, Jacob I'm Innocent Zuma, and Jacob appointed this guy, fired the previous incumbent, and the marketplace dropped. All the leading business people in South Africa basically stood up en masse and said to him, this guy just is not qualified to do the job, think again, and he had to back off quickly. So that also brings another message. That message is that there are sectors of our community and the sectors of our business community who have sway. We have this unemployment rate. We have a country that pre-COVID was already destroyed. 10 years of Jacob I'm Innocent Zuma has basically destroyed a lot of the hope that our country may have had. And we've got to rebuild that hope. That's the big picture. Welcome to South Africa. So now we have to look at what is the job of SAFA. Well, SAFA has got a very interesting job. As I mentioned, I sit on the ASISA, which is this big association of all the big players. And the message that I've been giving them and the so-called independent financial advisors in South Africa, so of the 30,000, there are about 5,000 so-called independents. And the message that I've been giving them very clearly is you've got to up your game. You've got to change the way in which you do business. And your historical thrust of only looking at money is not going to make it. And if you continue to just focus on money, you are going to be part of the many lost souls. So you've got to change the way in which you deal with your clients. And it's not just your client, but your clients, spouses, and families. So the reality check that I've laid down for people like Chris and Andre and Jeremy and Jose is to basically say to you guys, look, you've got to start changing the way in which you deal with clients. The regulators put forward a thing called treat clients fairly. It's not working. So you've got to develop a mechanism, a method whereby you incorporate things like compassion, empathy, and understanding when you deal with clients. And the best way to do this is to equip yourself with certain educational and knowledge aspects, which is totally ignored by the international financial communities. We call it Certified Post-Retirement Practitioner Program, and it focuses on 4 start points. They are the psychology of the journey towards aging, relationships post-retirement, preferably pre-retirement, which will start to overcome things like depression, suicide, and silver divorce. Powers of attorney that applies in South Africa, very, very important, because in South Africa, unlike in the States and the UK and most of the civilized countries, we have a thing which says that if you have a power of attorney between your loved ones and you get dementia, the power of attorney becomes null and void. Scary. And then the final aspect, which applies to everybody watching here, applies to you in your personal capacity, your family, your aging parents, grandparents, and eventually you, cost of frail care, and the different options that should be considered for you and as far as our members and all financial advisors in South Africa is concerned, is what education and knowledge can you share with the client? So putting the client first and last in terms of relationships. So that gives you a brief overview of one of the world first projects we've run this year. We've done 3 of them. The second one that I would like to briefly mention in the last minute is I designed a thing called the 21 ultimate questions the client should consider asking of their current and future potential financial advisor. I've had a lot of pushback from many financial advisors who say that it's an overkill, whatever. But from the client's perspective and the clients who embrace this, they say this is the best thing since cottage cheese. I'll only quote one of the questions. Question number 21. Is my money your client, or am I your client? And if one can prove as a so-called financial advisor the ability to answer all 21 questions as a guideline for the client, we put ourselves just for a moment into the shoes of every client internationally. If one's financial advisor and the financial advisory community can answer those 21 questions, and Andy, we will be working on converting that into a UK model, a European model, Gary, into a USA model, and let's start changing the world. Thank you very much for listening to me.
Derek, thank you very much indeed for that powerful presentation. I am staggered at how much time and effort you put into trying to make the advisory sector in South Africa better than it currently is. You're a man with great vision, a man with great integrity, and I'm very, very pleased that you're now also part of the TTF community as well. And we will do everything to support you, Derek, because your worldview aligns with ours 100%. It really does. It really, really does. Derek, thank you so much for your presentation. We're going to go to a few minutes of Q&A discussion. And then we'll have brief introductions from those folks who haven't yet had a chance to introduce themselves. But first of all, does anybody have anything they'd like to follow up with Derek about? Just wave your hand if you do. Nicole, please go for it. Thank you, Nicole.
Thanks very much, Derek. Great to hear about everything that you're doing. Mine is really more a curiosity about whether you are getting any questions as yet from clients, or whether other of your members are getting those questions about increased understanding or disclosure about the impact of their investments. So beyond how it'll affect their future, but it's more broadly. Just curious if you're getting that kind of questioning as yet.
Absolutely. Nicole, a visit to our website, which is safer.coza, will give you some of that. And if you go down to the 21 questions, you'll see question number 13 certainly focuses on the point you've just made. And to answer your question, we've been approached by the public on a regular basis, 2, 3, some weeks, 10 people approach us. Even companies and even people in employee benefits, employers and others have approached us. And one is a particular embassy in Pretoria with 35 local staff and a total of 50 staff, including from their home country. And they wanted SAFER to set up a webinar conference. And I just said, nope. Those things don't work anymore. They're a complete waste of time. And they're a complete waste of time because if you've got 50 people watching a webinar or coming to a conference, whatever, it forgets the one basic point. And Nicole, it'll come back to the question you've asked, is that each one of the 50 people are uniquely different. And by being uniquely different, it means that you can sit and listen to someone talk for an hour or 2 hours, absorb it, and then you go home and carry on with your life. It's the implementation. It's the focus on that uniquely different person and in terms of their requirements. And so I said to this particular embassy and ambassador, I said, look, what I would prefer is to get all 50 of your staff to engage with one of our members. And I choose the members very simply. If you are a CPRP, Certified Post-Retirement Practitioner graduate, I will introduce you to the inquiries. And the inquiries we've had speak exactly to your question, Nicole, because so many people have come to me and said, look, we've been hurt. We bought in South African terms, a retirement annuity as a form of retirement personal plan. I think it's a 10 something in America. And she said that what happened to her was she bought this contract through the company broker, and 5 years into the process, she was forced to stop this product. And she had 100,000 units, dollars or rands, academic, and the penalty was 40,000, 40% penalty for having stopped retirement annuity. Now that's the type of thing. So question number 13, Nicole, when you have the chance to look at the 21 questions, look at question number 13. There's a little subparagraph which says, please explain all forms of early termination costs and penalties to me on my existing products and any new product that you may wish me to consider. Nicole, I'm not sure if I answered all of what you were asking.
Yeah, no, that's helpful. Thanks, Derek.
Thank you, Nicole. Thank you, Derek. Derek, the question framework that you've created aligns very well with the TTF initiative. The TTF initiative is about having a protective wrapper around the client. and it's essentially a commitment that the client will not have any harm done to him or her. And we talk about it in our book. I'll mention it briefly after the break, but I can see a very strong alignment between the way you're thinking with your question bank and this particular initiative, which I'll talk about later. We do have a few folks who've joined since we did the introduction. So Fiona, please unmute yourself and introduce yourself. Thank you.
Good evening, everybody. Fiona from Umhlanga in KwaZulu-Natal, and I'm part of Derek's group. So sorry I'm late, but I'm here.
Very nice of you to be here, Fiona. Thank you for being here. And we've just had Sharon joining us as well. Sharon's going to be speaking later on today, but Sharon, you've timed it perfectly. We're just having a second round of introductions, so please do briefly introduce yourself, Sharon. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Andy. Appreciate it. I'm Sharon Constanson. My day job is many, which starts with corporate governance, board evaluations, foreign exchange risk management, chairman of the South African Chamber of Commerce, and a whole bunch of other pro bono activities that keep me out of mischief. I'm based outside of London in the UK and have very strong links with South Africa and various governance, and particularly foreign exchange and chamber activities, building trade between both countries. I don't know if that covers what you wanted, but is that okay?
Yeah, absolutely perfect. Thank you very much, Sharon. We'll hear more from Sharon later. And now to Mr. Paul Dowding, who kind of came to this by accident. Paul, please introduce yourself. Thank you.
Yeah, I'm definitely an interloper here. I'm in the States. I'm a co-founder of a distributed ledger technology startup, and we're raising funds to build a production version of our protocol. So it's in the sort of what most people know as the blockchain space. And really what differentiates our product is that it's near real-time, high-capacity, scalable, and has enriched functionality around future dated payments, payables, receivables, and also full double entry accounting, which is lacking in many of the solutions that are out there. And my involvement with Andy and the TTF has been more around how we can create more certainty and transparency with some of this new technology. So it's you know, I've been involved in various sections. I was misled. I thought this was supposed to be TTF in the pub, although it's still 12 o'clock in midday in the US. But anyway, I'm happy to listen in. It's always, whenever I've been a part of these sessions, it's always good to get everyone's different perspectives. So
thank you for being with us, Paul, even if it is by accident. That's really good. Okay, folks, it's 9 minutes past the hour. We're gonna have a short comfort break, just long enough to stretch your legs and grab a cup of tea, coffee, or whatever you want. And we're going to reconvene, please, at 1/4 the hour. So we've got 5-6 minutes tops. Thank you all very, very much indeed for your input so far. Presentations we've had from Nicole and Derek have been great. And we'll reconvene at 1/4. Thank you very much. Thank you. Super. Okay, so we're going to switch things around. So you're going to go on next then, Sharon. So I'd like you to talk about what you think it's going to take to fix financial services or reform financial services in South Africa. So folks, we're going to be hearing from Sharon Constantion. I love saying Sharon's surname now, and then we're going to be hearing from Gary after. So we're going to do a quick switch of the running order. Sharon, please do recap on your introduction and then talk to us about what you think it's going to take to help reform financial services in South Africa. Thank you.
How long have you got? Because I think I need more time than I've got. I'm being facetious.
5-10 minutes would be great. We've got loads to talk about, so that's cool.
Given that I wasn't sure I was going to be able to make this meeting, I haven't prepared specifically, so I'm going to ad lib, if I may. So I'm not going to come with any statistics or deep data in any respect. The financial services sector in South Africa is very robust in many ways. You have a strong reserve bank, you have strong credit systems, you've got banks that have been over the decades very well run. So some leading edge technologies being used. There's a lot of good stuff within the banking sector. What we're struggling with is, as you've got globally, is the people. people within it, the ethics within it. But South Africa has an additional complexity, is the degree of political complexity and the degree of crime, corruption, those kind of things. You've also got a massive population that needs to be banked, that is not banked, that can't be banked, and therefore you've got all sorts of side activities to a far greater degree than what you'd get in a fully fledged first world market. And there you've got, once again, crime and corruption, opportunism. They're quite, actually, that's quite first world in terms of the way some of those things are meted out. I mean, I look through COVID, the degree of corruption and the seniority of capability of the corruption just absolutely blows my mind. So I think that's one of their big challenges they have to deal with. And I think it's the leadership changes that have occurred over the decades. I think in some of your environments in banks and down through the different management scales, whether that competence is adequate for those roles as the market is evolving and the complexities of the financial markets are evolving, the digitization of the markets are changing. I think there's some challenges there they have to deal with. So I very much, you have got a very strong system with a good credit process. There are a lot of other complexities. The rating agencies are rating the country, 2 rating agencies are rating the country tomorrow. They had Reserve Bank meetings today, which I haven't had a chance to look at as to how they're going. But you have a very strong independent Reserve Bank. But a lot of other things are going off the topic slightly from what you're saying, is about how do we fix the financial culture within South Africa. It's leadership.
Thank you. That was a very succinct capture of some very important points, Sharon. Allow me, if I may, to just put a few questions to you as if we were doing an interview, as it were. So culture is a very, very big problem to solve, isn't it? It's a big, complex, multifaceted issue. Where on earth do you start? Where on earth do you start trying to repair?
So I say my beginning was, how long have we got? Yeah. I think there's 2 key levels I would look at if I was looking at education and trying to improve that aspect. One is some of the things, some of the initiatives Cyril Ramaphosa is bringing in, which is bringing in education on ethics and on culture and on behavior, more about ethics right down at school children level. So the generations that are coming through, with a bit of luck, will be coming with a different expectation, a different ethical disposition. Now, if we achieve that, that will help hugely, but that is tomorrow's solution. Today's solution is to educate people into, and probably using to a certain degree, the ESG agenda to help people understand that finance also needs to be doing the right thing, that in finance, the people who work there must be doing the right thing. I mean, the youth today all want the right thing done, but yet we still got this culture of it's me, and the degree of corruption that we've got occurring. So it is an education process. So every bank has got to take it upon themselves. You can't ask government to do it. They just don't have the funds, the wherewithal, the mechanism, or the agility to do it, however much they have the desire. What you need is private, well, and they've got a lot of these private-public partnerships that are springing up all over South Africa, where private sector is coming in to support that activity. And they just need more of it focused. And look, if they brought in a police system that was effective, that there were consequences that were not desired as an outcome of doing these things inappropriately, that would potentially help. But that's another topic completely.
Sharon, thank you very much indeed. I know that you need to be dashing off quite shortly. We'll invite comments and questions from the other attendees that we have with us. And we're also going to invite a couple of folks who haven't yet introduced themselves, because they've only just recently joined, to also introduce themselves as well. But first of all, does anybody have any comments or questions they'd like to put to Sharon following her session just now?
Yes, I have, Sharon, just one comment in that we as as taxpayers in this country, and I'm sure I speak on behalf of all honest citizens in our country, we would love to see all these corrupt people from all ends of the spectrum wearing orange suits and in jail. And that is including Jacob, I'm innocent, Zuma. It's mind-boggling, but we have to do it because that will set the foundation for the changes that we need, changes to the reform that the finance sector needs. And our most recent experiences, we had this Malawian minister, evangelical minister, who had defrauded his congregation of 100 million rand, and he was given 200. He and his wife, his name is Shepherd and Mary, nothing to do with biblical Mary, and they were given a 200,000 rand bail, and they skipped the country, and fascinating. So we're hoping the extradition treaty between Malawi and South Africa works, and these people will come back and wear orange suits. But that's the type of thing that impacts directly on the whole population range in South Africa.
I think another clue to the longer term success, Nicole, I'll take your question now, is to empower Cyril Ramaphosa to do what he knows is right. I think that's a key from the top change. Sorry, Nicole.
No, no problem. Thanks so much, Sharon. I just had a question, but it relies on sort of an assumption of the relationship you have with the Reserve Bank. Just that we do have a strong Reserve Bank. We know that it's very independent, and that's great. I know that they've joined the Network for Greening the Financial System, but they've not made any sort of commitments like some of the other central banks have made from around the world. And I was just wondering if you know what the deal is there. Is it that they're working on it, but they're not ready to sort of be audible, or they've signed this thing, but they're not really doing anything in terms of that strategy?
I don't know the answer. One of my team on the chamber who has direct connections with the Reserve Bank may know the answer. I'll find it out and I'll send it back via Andy. And if you could just drop an email to Andy so that I've got the question with clarity and not interpreting the wrong thing. We are going to be having a webinar with Secha in January. So it's a question we can ask him directly then.
Oh, very
Yeah,
good.
thank you. That'd be great.
That sounds very helpful indeed. Thank you, Sharon. Anybody else with anything for Sharon? In which case, we'll wrap up Sharon's session there. So once again, we wave to say hello because you can't really clap on Zoom. So thank you very much indeed, Sharon, for your session. That's been great. We know you need to dash off shortly.
Sorry to be so rude. I've done what seagulls do. Run in, make a noise, and run out again. I do apologize, but I do need to now deal with a customer response.
Of course.
So much.
It's always come first, Sharon, so that's fine.
Thanks. Cheers.
Thank
Bye.
you. Thank you very much. Okay, we're going to squeeze in a couple of introductions. We are going to have an intro from, and forgive me because I know I'm going to mispronounce this, Klaus Geert. I'm guessing that's how you would pronounce it. And then we'll try to get an introduction from Koos again. So Klaus, please do unmute yourself and introduce yourself. And then we'll also try Koos once again. Koos, why don't you go first? Because it looks like Klaus is, yeah, Koos, please go first, then we'll go to Klaus. Thank you.
All right. Can you hear me now?
We can, perfectly well. Thank you. Tell us about yourself. Thank you.
I'm a straight financial advisor. No strings, no frills and nothing. I have a client base. Yeah, we look for more people. Yeah, I'm on the wrong side of 65. And so a lot of my clients are in that age bracket and older and just younger, pre-retirement type of stuff. But there's absolute need for information per se, you know, living annuities, life annuities, that type of stuff, which is not necessarily, you know, for some people, yeah, it's best to go on life annuities and stuff. For other people, where you can manage the money and stuff, yeah, the living annuities are the options. And of course, normal investments. I mean, but the difference between me and other guys is I manage those portfolios. I've got spreadsheets for every client, updated every evening. So if they call me at 12 tonight, I can tell them what happened in the market today and what the graphs look like.
Very good. Thank you very much indeed. Lovely to have you with us, Koos. Thank you very much. What part of South Africa are you in, sir?
I'm in Pretoria.
In Pretoria. And
Yeah.
tell me, how should I be pronouncing your first name?
Koos, K-O-O-S.
Koos. Okay, I'll try harder next time. Thank you very much. Let's now go back to Klaus. So Klaus, we can see you as well as hopefully hear you. Please do introduce yourself, sir. Thank you.
Hello, Andy. Yeah, sorry, I didn't join earlier, but I know you were already going. It's my birthday tomorrow, and my wife gave me a nice meal, so I actually just say hello and have to say goodbye again. But my friend Derek said, you know, join when you can.
Yeah.
So I quickly joined in. I'm from Stellenbosch in the Western Cape. I'm in the industry now for say 15 years.
Yeah.
And in finances already before that. And yeah, Derek is my mentor. He introduced me to SAFA. He said, you work with elderly people. Why don't you do the post-retirement course, practitioner course? And yeah, so I get more and more involved. But I also realized this year, all of us, I suppose, have got a lot of Zooming that we did. But the good thing is we can see people in UK or elsewhere that we otherwise wouldn't have seen. So thanks very much.
Thank you very much indeed, Klaus. Thank you.
Andy, I would just like to add a comment that Klaus von Pressington was our first certified post-retirement practitioner graduate in the world.
Oh,
so I'm very proud of you, Klaus. Well done.
Yeah.
And he passed his exams. I'm looking forward to welcoming Fiona when she gets her act together.
Yeah.
Very good. Very, very good. Okay, it's lovely to see you guys as friends. Thank you very much indeed, Klaus and Koos earlier. We're now going to go to Gary. Gary, as you heard earlier, is from Washington, DC. So Gary, please give us your perspective on not just South Africa, but the emerging markets as well. What are the big issues? What are the trends that you're seeing? What is the insight that you'd like to share? Thank you very much indeed, Gary. Thank you.
Thanks. Yeah, you can read my bio on the program that Andy was kind enough to share, but basically for over 30 years, I've been an independent analyst and advisor following about 75 different developing economies, and I've come at it from twin perspectives. One is the development one, which is probably more pertinent to this exercise, advising governments, banks and brokers associations on financial sector and capital market development, and the other is advising fund managers, institutional investors on opportunities in emerging financial markets. And I'm happy to complement the perspective of some others. Derek on the line from the industry, our colleague who just left, talking a little bit from the macro side in the banking sector more generally, Nicole from ESG. I'm going to really emphasize sort of a more mainstream perspective, looking at South Africa in global emerging market and continental context, and basically, looking at the balance sheet overall, what's been good and bad traditionally, where are we right now? We're in the middle of a very, almost a watershed debt crisis in the country that has the potential really to shake the financial system and all fiduciary responsibilities to their core. And so the mission of the Transparency Task Force couldn't be more important at this time. And first I want to open up, I didn't, share this on the slides but I have a report here that you can all look up that I've been an advisor on, and it's something put out by ABSA every year with a London-based think tank, the OMFIF, which is the Africa Financial Markets Index. Basically, it ranks about 24 markets according to a number of criteria, everything from the general economic sophistication to the quality of the institutional investor base, institutional legal regulatory transparency framework, and some other factors as well. And as you can guess, I mean, South Africa is the runaway leader. Out of a score of 100, it's in the 90s. There's nobody close. The runners up are all in the 60s and 50s. Because in many respects, I mean, we talk about South Africa being an emerging market, but in terms of its financial sector, it's very sophisticated. It's developed quality status. It's known in emerging markets to the extent that sort of the Rand acts as a proxy for risk on, risk off sentiment more generally. And as our colleague just mentioned, I mean, you have a very, sophisticated banking system, but also there are some warts on the story that authorities have been looking to try to remedy over the years, but perhaps they're losing ground in that they're going to be diverted by this absolutely overwhelming debt crisis that it's facing right now. And if you look at the ledger overall, as we mentioned, in terms of financial market depth and other criteria, South Africa is very far advanced. Yet you look at the banking sector, it's largely a cartel. It's very highly concentrated in a series of institutions. It's had a legacy of capital controls that have only recently been lifted. You have a huge percentage of the population that's unbanked. You've only recently introduced, deposit insurance and other protections for average depositors in the system. And you have very much a low household savings rate as far as emerging markets are concerned. So that tells you that in terms of diversifying into other financial products, the history has not been too positive. But the authorities have recognized this both in the public-private sector, slowly working at it. But now we're facing, if you're reading the headlines, you know that South Africa has lost its investment grade credit rating. It, by its own admission, is facing a debt to GDP ratio approaching 100%. And here we're talking about the public debt, as well as all the well-known state enterprises, Eskom, the airways, and the like. And it has depended, because of these low savings rates, it depended on foreign investors very much to finance that gap. Foreign investors are very wary, not only because of the rating, but because of some of the structural difficulties we talk about, the corruption, the underperformance, in terms of penetration of the banking system, the protections that don't exist. Now, to finance the debt response, that has fallen primarily on that wonderful network of banks and fund managers and asset managers that's developed over these years, to the extent that the state is actually, the central bank, it has its long-standing reputation for independence at risk of compromise, because it's being asked to fund these huge budget deficits, 10% and above, for as far as the eye can see. And so it itself is fiscalizing a problem that's going to obviously erode its monetary policy capability. But that holds for the banking system as a whole. Banks are being required to fund, are being required to buy government bonds to the extent that it's now 10% of their assets. That's a risk to them in the future. That obviously crowds out lending that can go otherwise, to small businesses and companies. The same is happening for asset managers and particularly pension funds. There's a lot of talk about changing the pension guidelines, the famous Article 28, and foreign investors are watching this very closely, not only to expand the guidelines in terms of allowing government debt allocation, but putting some pressure on pension funds to invest in so-called infrastructure, job creation schemes that we know have not worked out well in the past, and that really threaten the system itself as well as the savings of small pensioners in the system right now. So you really need a voice, both locally and, that can use a global network, really to, represent the interests of depositors and pensioners in this process. We've seen this difficulty roll out in other emerging markets where the pension system is stripped, particularly the private pension system. We've seen it in Central and Eastern Europe. We're seeing it more recently in Latin America for, very near-term contingencies, whether it's to cover a budget deficit or to meet an immediate public policy emergency in terms of virus or other contingency. And then the system really dissolves or it stagnates and it cannot be rebuilt. And that's the difficulty we're facing right now, looking at South Africa. Foreign investors have been very, very wary this year, particularly on the debt side. They used to buy 30, 40% of South Africa's government debt. They see the central bank and others being forced to buy it, and they wonder about the future of the system, because obviously if you're a foreign investor, you're looking at your local counterparts and what their solvency and what their soundness is going forward in order to, have confidence to invest there. So these are the stakes that we're facing in terms of, representing the average saver and investor. And I hope, we can get to work, quickly on trying to address, some of these really compelling issues. Thanks.
Gary, thank you. What a wonderfully insightful section. That really, really was, Gary. Well, the thought that comes to my mind hearing you speak, Gary, is that if South Africa were to struggle with the kind of structural issues that you've spoken about, and if South Africa was unable to be seen confidently by the international markets, then if South Africa can't quite do it, then many of the emerging countries behind it are also going to struggle. So I guess on a kind of global perspective, the success of South Africa as a financially attractive marketplace is strategically important. Would you go along with that?
Yes, I mean, it's a bellwether, emerging market, particularly in terms of, the regulation and operation of its financial system. Now, of course, it's been a laggard in many respects in terms of, a low debt, even when you look at the continent, a low growth, high debt economy. And that's the squeeze that they're in now. I mean, you really can't delay this reckoning anymore. I mean, you can buy some time, that South Africa had to turn to the IMF this year, where it never had a relationship, other than in terms of providing technical advice, and it went in for a $1 billion program. But even there, the credibility is really under question because, they made some projections about some rapid turnarounds and, cutting spending, raising taxes, enacting some long overdue structural changes that aren't credible to the official institutions either. It all starts at home. I mean, everybody knows what the answer has to be. Usually there has to be some sort of crisis to force some sort of change, but that's really on top of the market right now. I mean, there is no more delay, as I mentioned, by, the government and private sector's own admission, they're going to be at 100% of GDP in the middle of the decade at the very latest, and they're probably at 85, 90% right now. And they're really just sort of trimming around the edges and attacking the problem. They're talking about in terms of budget adjustment, trimming wages, and the like, but you really have to take, a sledgehammer to some of these longstanding problems, really to really address both local and foreign investors' concerns. It really starts at the local level.
Thank you, Gary. And if I can connect one of the points you made with something Derek was saying earlier, would the markets respond positively if South Africa were to get tough on financial crime, fraud, corruption, if they were to lock a few bad guys up, and kind of demonstrate an unwillingness to tolerate suboptimal conduct, is a nice polite way of putting it. Would the markets like that? Would they markets see that as evidence that South Africa was going to get its act together in terms of creating a highly governed and credible marketplace?
I would say for South Africa, the bar is very low in this respect because you've had so many get away, so much impunity over the years. I know there's a leading figure in the ANC that, you know, it's finally caught up with him. But I think more critical is sort of the civil war that's going on right now, you know, in the ANC and the government generally, as to what kind of, you know, economic policy you're going to follow going forward. We've talked about, you know, these structural and changes and restoring integrity to the system, yet there's a wing and includes very much the young generation as well that really wants to go back, you know, to an era of, you know, heavy state intervention that invites, you know, that corruption influence and, you know, just runaway spending. And so you erode the, you know, reputation you had for independence, fiscal discipline, as well as not, you know, getting the bad people. And so, you know, you're striking out really on all fronts, but you really have to manage them simultaneously.
Thank you, Gary. I'm sure Derek might have one or two thoughts in response to that. Derek, can I draw you into the conversation, please? What would you say about what Gary's analysis has been of the South African market from an external perspective? What would you say to that?
Well, first of all, Gary, thank you very much. Excellent overview of the reality check that we have to face in South Africa. And that reality check, I grew up partly in the pensions world, and until the 1st of March this year, I was chairman of all the umbrella pension funds of one of the large institutions. And so I've got a personal history regarding that. And at my last trustee meeting, I made the point that I as one would support on behalf of the 300,000 members of our funds any form of strictly controlled infrastructure investment strategies that has no connection to the ANC government and their Marxist, communist, socialist ideology factors. So I would, if as a trustee of that fund, I would have supported that 100%. We as an association have made it very clear that we are totally against that amendment to Regulation 28 that will in any way give the ANC access to that money, because they have proven their inability over 26 years to manage money in any way without great corruption and other structures. So we as an association, SAFER, strongly encourage the amendments to Regulation 28, where funds, boards of trustees, who are the ultimate guardians of members' money, members' retirement money, that they will have, through the financial services industry, a properly controlled, and underline the two words, due diligence process, whereby part of the retirement fund monies can be properly, carefully invested in infrastructure in South Africa. That's the departure point from SAFER. Thank you.
Derek, thank you. What a wonderful collection of views here. And I'm just going to read out a very nice comment that Jose put in the chat. It's a very nice comment. It says, it's very encouraging. This is obviously after Gary's talk. It's very encouraging to realize how much knowledge and information outsiders have about the inner South Africa. Very happy. So Gary, you've made at least one person happy today, which is good. Very, very good. Okay, folks. Well, we have time for any other questions or comments in relation to Gary's session before we move into more general dialogue. Does anybody have anything else they'd like to comment following Gary's input? I think we're all good on that. So once again, let's wave to show our appreciation to Gary. That's how we do it here. Thank you very much. All join in. Just wave like you're 6. Remember when you're 12. Thank you very much. Fiona's digitally thanking, and Margaret's digitally thanking as well. I think Margaret's family must have had their tea by now, so maybe we'll have Margaret joining us again shortly. Okay, well done, Gary. Well done, Derek. Well done, Sharon. Well done, Nicole. It's been a really good introduction. I'm going to, oh, I've got a thumbs up from Jose, that's good. I'm going to mention a date to you all, and I'm going to explain the date as well. So let me share my screen once again. Share my screen. The first thing I want to show you is this spreadsheet. So this is the spreadsheet. Oh, I'll get to the top first. This is our 2021 master plan, okay? No need for any detail. There's only one date you need to make a note of, which I'll get to in a minute. But we have a very, very full schedule of activity next year. I'll just draw out a few points just to give you a feel for the kind of things that we do. So on Monday, January the 11th, we have a film night, which is when we'll be discussing The Big Short, one of the most famous finance films. Many of you will have seen it before. The idea is you watch it the weekend before, then on Monday at 6 p.m. to 7 p.m. UK time, a bit later for you, of course, we'll be discussing The Big Short. On the Tuesday, we've got an event about costs and charges and investments. On Wednesday, we've got an advisory group meeting, which you won't need to come to, obviously. On Thursday, we've got a book club. So we have film clubs where we discuss films. We have book clubs where we discuss books. And the first book club event is about a book called Crash Bank Wallop. It's written by a gentleman called Paul Moore. Paul Moore was a whistleblower. He reported bad conduct within HBOS, the banking group within the UK, and he paid a big, big price for doing so. It's a lovely story in the sense that he was a very courageous man standing up against all sorts of bad conduct. COVID permitting, which I frankly doubt, we'll have a face-to-face event in London in January the 20th. But that's looking very, very unlikely. The following week, we've got a lovely title, Turbocharging Transparency, Truthfulness and Trustworthiness with Technology. Technology is a natural ally to transparency. On Wednesday, January the 27th, we'll be interviewing one of the leaders. And on the 28th of January, we've got an event all about reforming the system in the UK. And that's the kind of model that will carry on throughout the year. You'll see on February the 1st, we've got another very well-known film we'll be reviewing called Barbarians at the Gate. These films are a great way to discuss the kind of underlying issues that cause the dynamics within the sector. We spoke about culture earlier. February the 9th, we've got Fixing Financial Services Through Cultural Reform, where we'll be focusing on that. We've got some holiday. TTF International Week is when I'll be doing, oh gosh, I think it's 20 different Zoom meetings in that 1 week, including, of course, one for South Africa. I will briefly go back to that one for South Africa. So as you can see here, the next South Africa Zoom meeting for us is Friday, December the 11th. So that's this year, Friday, December the 11th, 2 o'clock till 2:45 p.m. local time on Zoom. In fact, the same link as this, and it will just be a catch up and a natter about things going on. Going back to my other event planning page, and that's basically the process that continues: book club, film reviews, country-specific events, topic-specific events, etc., etc. Whole bunch of holidays there, and so on and so forth, and so on and so forth. We have the busiest program in the world. I think I've got the best team in the world, including Alexandra, who heads up our events, and we've got a busy year ahead. Now, the next actual proper symposium for South Africa is November the 18th next year. So today's November the 19th. We've got 1 year minus a day until we get to this event here. How would you reform the finance sector in South Africa? November the 18th. Same time as today's event. Between now and then, my job, the TTF's job, with hopefully as much support from everybody involved as possible, is to build TTF South Africa. We've got a year to do it. We'll look for as many people to get involved as possible. And the process for doing that could not be any simpler, okay? We just need you to help a little bit. We only need a little bit of help. What we don't have is the local knowledge, okay? Once we've got the local knowledge, we can do everything else. So I'm going back to this document here, which is the mind map, because we want your help in completing this mind map. We want you to tell us about the professional associations in South Africa, the think tanks, the civil society groups, the key academics, the key authors, politicians, regulators, policymakers, etc., etc., etc. So one of the points that Alexandra will refer to in the notes that she circulates tomorrow is she'll literally give you some questions. You know, who are the key politicians in South Africa as far as the financial sector is concerned? Which are the think tanks? What are the professional associations and bodies? Who are the main journalists? We'll spell it all out for you. You won't know the answer to all those questions, I'm sure, but you will probably be able to very, very easily answer many of them. And what we'll then do is we'll combine all that information together. We'll do some of our own research. We'll produce a mind map for the whole of South Africa that will in effect represent the key people who are significant influencers in South Africa. And I must remind you to think about our strategy for driving change. Our strategy for driving change, and we believe this to be very effective, is to bring together the thinking of two groups of people. People like us who have a sense of passion and purpose for the change that we want to see, and of course the other group, those that we characterize as having the power and the position to make change possible. And let me remind you that in the UK, even though we've only been going for a few years, we've already had 2 government inquiries opened. I've personally run 4 meetings in the House of Commons. We've recruited politicians into the all-party parliamentary group on pension scams. We're also the secretariat for the all-party parliamentary group on personal banking and fairer financial services. Everything we've done in the UK, we can either do all of it or some of it to one degree or another in South Africa. The important thing is to have the right people involved, the right strategy, the right intent. And if our intent is noble and honest, and it certainly is, we will get somewhere, because it's really hard to argue with common sense. I remember on the 12th of September 2016, I ran my first ever event in the House of Commons. I managed to bring together all the major regulators, all the major trade bodies, and I got them all to talk about what they were doing to protect the UK pension savings public's interest from the problem of hidden costs and charges. And I got them to all give an account. We had a 3-hour meeting, about 55, 60 people. There we were in the House of Commons. I co-chaired the event with Tom Tugans at NBE MP, who is now the chair of the Foreign Affairs Select Committee, a very well respected politician from all parts of the House. And that event worked superbly well, because what it showed was we were doing a lot, but we weren't doing enough. So I turned that into a campaign. We got a letter that we put together. It basically said we would like the UK government to open an inquiry on this topic, and it worked. And one of the reasons it worked is we got the letter co-signed by about 111 people. They opened the inquiry, lots of evidence gathering, a formal report, change. This is a good example of how we go about driving change in the system. And more recently, just about a couple of months ago, there I was having a meeting with Boris Johnson, our Prime Minister, about the problem of pension scams. A couple of his constituents are pension scam victims. To cut a long story short, we ended up having a meeting with the Prime Minister. So this is all about connecting people like us who want things to be better with the people who actually have control over the rule book, the control over the regulators. Now, it's a pretty well-known fact that something like 10% only 10% of responses to government consultations about financial matters are from pro-consumer organizations. Yeah, the 90% is often from the industry that will very often have an agenda which is about protecting the status quo to protect the profit margins. That's how they are. That's why they exist, you know. And we've got to break through that. We've got to understand that there is a David and Goliath dynamic here. We are the weak, small underdog, but we have intent and we have purposefulness. And of course, that intent and purposefulness is all that's really necessary to make a difference in the world. I go all the way back to that famous Margaret Mead quote about not underestimating what a small group of people can do if they have right intent. So that's kind of what we're doing. So we've got between now and next year to build TTF South Africa into something meaningful. We don't just want numbers of people, we want numbers of the right people. We want to systematically and strategically identify who our key people are, politicians, policymakers, regulators, and that's the plan. So we'll be wrapping up in just a few minutes' time, but I want to go round and give everybody a chance to reflect on the conversation we've had so far today. It's been a very, very enjoyable conversation from my point of view. We've had some great speakers. Derek, I'm going to go to you as, if you like, the patriarch of this group in so many ways. Derek, please do reflect briefly for me on what's happened today with our environment, with our Zoom meeting today. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Andy, and thanks to all the other speakers and to everyone else that that partook today. It's a meaningful start. It's something that I have often dreamt about, and I never knew there was such a thing as TTF in the world. And thank you, Andy, for including Safer and the old man from Cape Town.
You're more than welcome. I think you're going to be a key part in what we're planning to do in South Africa, Derek. You certainly are. Thank you very much for being with us. We're going to go to Gary, then Margaret, then Koos, then Stephanie, then Klaus. So Gary, to you next, please.
I enjoyed the interaction very much, particularly as well. Now that I can classify myself as a youngster, I guess. It's one of the rare occasions, because I'm often, one of my other pursuits is I started a program at Georgetown University School of Foreign Service to train the next generation of analysts in emerging economies and financial markets. So I see really the millennial perspective way too much. I don't see the other demographic that's critically important as well. So I really enjoyed the conversation. I hope we have some concrete deliverables maybe for our next meeting in early December, so we can at least close this year with some happy thoughts and achievements.
Gary, thank you very much indeed. Lovely. Margaret, to you, please. I hope your family had a good supper. And Margaret, your thoughts, please. Thank you.
Thanks. Yes, they had a lovely supper. I'd just like to say thank you to Derek for introducing me to TTF. It's really opened my eyes, and the array of speakers this evening for us has been wonderful. So thanks to everyone. And I think we've said a lot. I've put my comments into the Zoom chat group, but I'd like to finish up, Andy, to compliment your Margaret Mead one, to read the other famous caption by Mahatma Gandhi: "A small body of determined spirits fired by an unquenchable faith in their mission can alter the course of history." Yeah. And keep up the great work. Thanks, guys.
That's a lovely note to make, Margaret. That really is. I'm going to briefly talk about Mahatma Gandhi. Last year, I had the opportunity to speak in India about corporate governance. So that went very, very well. And it was an excellent conference. I spoke out and I really enjoyed myself there. A roughly 20-minute walk from the hotel was a museum about Mahatma Gandhi. And I must admit, I really did not know very much about the man at all, but I learned a great deal when I went to the museum. And I hadn't realized that much of his inspiration came from when he was in South Africa as a young man. And I also believe that Mahatma Gandhi had some he went on to influence many people around the world. So it's lovely, Margaret, that you've referred to that quotation, which is one of my favorite quotations of all times. And believe you me, it's tough being a campaigner. And every now and then I tap into the wisdom of quotations like that one to keep my energy levels up and my positivity high. Margaret, thank you very much. Let's now go to Koos to invite Koos to comment on this evening, please. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Sorry that I was late. Yes, we want to be involved because it's, look at Derek, you know, he's my grandpa, you know, and I still want to catch up with him. So we'll stick around and see what we can do.
Thank you very much, Koos. Lovely. Very good indeed. From Koos to Klaus, Klaus Gert, yourself, please.
Yeah, Klaus is 100%. I've got a long surname. Now, as Koos said, together with Derek and Margaret, and so we'll get together in South Africa and speak to each other. And hopefully next year, this time, things will look quite different to what Gary told us now about how the outside world sees us and what we realize we are in at the moment. But I'm an optimist, and I think we'll get out of it again. Together we can. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed, sir. Thank you. Fiona, if you can, please do come back onto the screen and give us your final comments, please.
Thank you. Just thank you to Derek for including us. So that's why we're here. And it's been informative. And
very good. Very good.
Glad I'm part of it. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. And lastly, I'm going to go to Alexandra just to say cheerio. Alexandra, could you please come onto the screen and just say cheerio? And thank you so much, Alexandra, for doing all the work that you've done about to help the event to be organised so well today. Thank you very much, Alexandra.
Thank you. Hi.
Okay. So,
that's very interesting.
Alexandra will circulate some notes tomorrow. Please do pay attention to those and please do pick up on the actions. Probably the single most important thing is a little bit of voluntary effort from everybody. It'll probably take 10-15 minutes tops, is to help us with that mind map, because once we've got that, we know what we're working with, we know what to do, we have a very effective process thereafter. Okay, thank you all very much indeed. Good evening, and signing out now. Thank you all folks very much indeed. Thank you. Bye all. Bye-bye. Bye-bye. Very good. Bye-bye. Thank you.